do current games really suck? And I am slightly annoyed to say, even in my very positive Discord community, which you can join for free if you want to talk with us on a daily basis, some people are often very cynical about new AAA games, especially AAA games, but in general, recent current games. There seems to be this school of thought that what has been done before is by default better, which is the whole reason why a lot of people say, I've played Diablo 2, I'm never gonna play something like Path of Exile or any other derivative titles that are trying to shake up the formula a little bit, but are at the end of the day quite similar. There's this idea that because someone nailed it in the past, you're closing yourself off entirely to new experiences. And the perception of a lot of these new games when they come out is it's AAA trash. It's current trash. And I have to say, I'm really disappointed when I see this in people. There are some amazing recent games, and you're really closing yourself off to some great experiences if you're just shutting the door to them wholesale. So this video is going to be a slight diatribe, but I want to get some of this stuff off my chest and share with you some of the thoughts that have been in my head when I see people be cynical about new game releases. And this was kind of sparked by the Guardians of the Galaxy release. And the initial response was, it's gonna suck, right? And there's a fair aspect to it, which is the Avengers game disappointed a lot of people. Fair enough. The expectation that this one is also going to be a disappointment. But for me, it seems like the default perception these days is AAA games are going to suck. They're going to be derivative. They're going to be shit. The game worlds are going to be uninspired. The open worlds are going to be boring as fuck. And the quests are going to be repetitive and mind-numbing. I have to say, guys, this can be the case. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but we have some examples of some incredible fucking games in the last few years. And I'm pulling up for me, the example here that really brings this home. Final Fantasy VII Remake, a game that I fucking cherish. It's an example that elevates the original game, bringing it the fidelity of what can be done now with current graphics. And it's not that it's better than the original, but it showcases the original material in a way that is only possible with the fidelity and the care and the details that you can have with a current modern title. And it's a great example of preserving the original content that was very trend-setting, generation-affecting, and bringing it home to the current modern times so that people who didn't play the original, maybe they weren't even born back then, can now experience that game and really enjoy it in its best form. So I don't accept the fact that new games are just worse. You can look at games that are derivative. We could talk about the fact that Far Cry 6, for example, is very similar in formula to Far Cry 5 and really many of the games in the series. I would argue that that's what makes a series, okay? We can look back at other series that are not criticized in that way as much, like Uncharted, which I have right here, the collection, which I love. They are great games. But go back and play the first one and tell me, look at my face and tell me that the first game is as amazing as the last one. Sure, the most recent ones stay in their lane, right? They're not doing something incredibly different in essence to the original games, but there are massive improvements. And it's staggering how good some of the recent games in the Uncharted series look. They really milk all the possible performance of, what current gen is there when they release these titles. So for me to pretend that there's no progress and that the original game is somehow this perfect masterpiece that cannot be beaten by further entries, either in the series or in the genre, is just being silly. And it's not making any services to the overall conversation when someone jumps in with that sort of argument. So I do recognize there are things that were achieved in, the older games that newer games perhaps don't achieve, and we can talk about examples like that. But the default perception that we're going to be cynical towards new games, we're going to not appreciate good graphics because somehow that doesn't have any value, right? uh, it's another thing that I see in movies. When people see good CGI in movies, they never raise it as a positive. Some people do, but a lot of times you'll see people neglect that completely, right? There's no appreciation for good CGI because that's easy. That's easy. And I really, really take issue with that because it's not. We see bad CGI all the time, and then we complain when we see it. It's like plumbing. If your plumbing is great, you're not out there complaining about it or talking about it. But the moment it's failing, that's when you bring it up. And it's the same kind of perception problem we have here. We have this like reinforcing hypothesis where when something does go wrong in recent games and there is some problem with the graphics, then that gets brought up and, they crucify the makers of the game. But when the makers of the game have some amazing CGI or action pieces, it's almost like we expect it and we take it for granted. And I hate that. I'm always going to be the person who's out there appreciating great graphics that elevate the other parts of the game. It doesn't mean you can get away with shitty gameplay just by having good graphics, but one elevates the other. And those are a whole. They make a whole, and they make the package that you ultimately experience. I really wanted to get this off my chest because I've been seeing this a lot with current game releases. For example, Age of Empires 4 is around the corner as well, and a lot of people say something like, we already know it's going to fail, it's not going to be as good as Age of Empires 2. And when you have that mindset going into it, guess what? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It won't be as good because you're already predisposed. Your mind is closed to anything that could be slightly new or different or interesting. And maybe even if it isn't as good as the original, it could actually have something interesting to give you that you've closed yourself to. You shut the door to anything new and interesting. And instead, you're living in the past like many people. They're still listening to the same music that they did when they were teenagers. And while I also listen to some of that music, I think we shouldn't close ourselves to something new and exciting and interesting. And we don't have to be cynical about new stuff just because that's what's hip out there, to hate on new AAA titles. It's totally fine to criticize when they don't pan out, but it's also great to hype up when they get stuff right and kind of promote it, show that we appreciate when they do get stuff right and they get attention to detail and awesome worlds to explore, weapons to use and try and have fun with in games. So balance out the negativity in this equation and be the grain of sand that's pulling the scales towards the positive side a little bit. And with that, I leave you until next week. Thank you for watching.